Welcome to all the delegates and to our panelists. Today we've got Anton and Chris, the presenter, we've got Miraldi, and we've got Olga as well as voters. So welcome to the panelists. It's great that you are forming part of today. My name is Adele Kroch and I'm from Food Focus. And this is the second webinar for the Intervarsity Brew 2023. We are really looking forward to the presentation this week, today, and this presentation will also be recorded and the slides will be posted onto the intervarsitybrew.co.za website. If you have missed the webinar that we had yesterday, How to Brew a Better Beer by Karl Muskovich, please watch it, as Karl provided some amazing information on the purpose of each step, why it is important, and what you can do to check that specific step in your process. The recording is currently available on the intervarsitybrew.co.za website. If you're on the website, at the top of the homepage on the right-hand corner, you've got the hamburger. If you click on the hamburger, you will see there is a link that says Webinars 2023. And the recording as well as his presentation is available for you on that page. I would like to draw your attention to this year's sponsors. You can see there are many companies that is involved with the event to make sure that you get valuable information, and also it will be putting your name and your interest out into industry. As Karl mentioned yesterday, when he was a student, he also participated at this event, and currently he's working for SAB. So you never know what the event can do for your future. I would like to introduce you to your speaker today and his topic. Chris Roth will be chatting to you about the BJCP entry form and how to complete this form. Now, just to tell you a little bit more about Chris, Chris has been involved with the InterVarsity since it started in 2008 and has organized the judging since 2009. He is a BJCP national judge and the BJCP Africa representative. He has arranged several judging exams and judged in more than 35 competitions. He is a past Warthogs Brewer Club chairman, and he said he would also like more time to brew at home more often. Chris, we are really looking forward to your presentation and to see to it what they need to do and how the judging is taking place. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Adele. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be back. Just listening to that, I guess one thing in lockdown is I managed to have a little more time than I had previously to do some brewing. So I managed to brew quite a bit more during lockdown. Right. My topic today is all about a bit of background for BJCP and how to complete the entry form, really looking at a bit of background and then how the beers are actually entered and judged at the InterVarsity. Obviously, a big part of it is the actual competition and the judging and the feedback and how people do and the scores they get and so on. So let's just see, there we go. There's our contents. I'm going to go through a little bit of a background about the BJCP as an organization, then some judging about how we judge at the InterVarsity, and then a little bit about just a little background about how the judges typically would approach a beer. And I see here's a picture from last year's InterVarsity judging. One of our panelists today, voter in deep discussion, judging the beers. I think he was at the lagers table last year. So that's typically what one of the judging tables look like. Okay, background, as Adele mentioned very briefly. Right at the very first InterVarsity, I thought I'd just go into just a bit of history of the InterVarsity and my involvement. In 2008 was the very first InterVarsity, and I was working at TIX. I just joined and I asked to be a member of the team then. The rules weren't quite as organized as they are today, our team actually consisted of quite a lot of staff members, but we took part. And then because Professor Mike Haydenrich was one of the brewers, Tux won a lot of the categories, and were asked to host the 2009 version. And from then on, with a bit of discussion of our organizers and SAB, the rules became more firm, the present way that they are, with students taking part and so on, and no staff other than just a staff member in charge of the team. And I was asked as a member of the organizing committee to organize the judging properly according to BJCP guidelines, and I've done that ever since. As mentioned there, I have been a BJCP judge since 2008 and category of national judge since 2011, and I'm currently the BJCP Africa representative. There is a European, Middle East and Africa representative, and under him there are representatives, one for Europe, one for Africa, and one for the Middle East. So I'm currently the Africa representative. Okay, about the BJCP as an organization, there is its front page. If you go onto bjcp.org, you'll see that, and you can see a few stats, and on the left, some of the menu items. I'll go through a little bit about the actual purpose of the BJCP and so on, but there's just basically the introduction, worldwide certification organization. Let's just move that out of the way, for judges of beer and related fermented products, founded in 1985, and since then it's grown quite a lot. The main roles of the BJCP are in the next slide. Let's just get that up. There we go. Mission statement: to encourage knowledge, understanding, and appreciation of the world's diverse beer, mead, and cider styles, promote, recognize, and advance beer, mead, and cider tasting, evaluation, and communication, and develop standardized tools, methods, and processes for the structured evaluation and feedback of beer, mead, and cider. That's a bit vague, but I think these 4 objectives probably say more clearly exactly what they do. First one is certified judges. So to become a judge, you have to go through a proper process of examination and certifying that you can actually judge beer, and you can move up depending on experience and how well you do on the exams. That's the next item: track the judge experience growth using a point system. Third, very important objective: develop style guidelines. And we'll see that this is quite important because there's so many different styles of beer, and what could be a positive characteristic of one beer would be a negative characteristic in a different style. So you do have to have correct style guidelines, and that's one of their main objectives, and probably one of the best known documents is the style guidelines. And then competitions. In order to run a competition, you have to register it with them, abide by the rules, give feedback and so on, and it gives guidelines for running exams and score sheets and competition rules and so on. So I think that really gives like the nitty-gritty of what they're up to. Current statistics, which changes almost every day by 1 or 2, but this was from yesterday: 8,586 judges, currently in 66 countries, and we'll look at those countries in a moment, and 12,000 competitions sanctioned. And they keep statistics from each competition of how many beers were entered and which styles win, where the winners are from, and track some trends over the years. Here's an interesting slide which you will find on their website about the judges per country, and this is in order clearly, and as expected, it's a USA-based organization. It started in the USA, so they've got by far the most. At one stage, we were second. We were, in fact, the first country outside of the USA that saw this and decided we would like to get involved, and we had the first exam outside of South Africa. So at one stage, South Africa was on this list at number 2. We've dropped a bit down the list now. There's the list. As you can see, it drops quite a lot from the USA down through Canada, Australia, Brazil. There's been quite a lot of growth in South American countries lately, as you can see there, Mexico, Chile, and so on, and then others that you might expect: Canada, Australia, UK, New Zealand, and South Africa. Currently 82 judges active in South Africa, which I think is still not bad for a relatively small country in terms of the number of people interested in judging and drinking different beers, but that number is hopefully going to grow. Also from their website, I found this particularly interesting slide. Judges per province, as they understand the provinces, which is not always completely correct. If you look down this list, Eastern Cape 1, Free State 6, glad to say, and with the InterVarsity as well, that there's a number of judges in the Free State. Gauteng and GP are the same thing, so there's 40 there, 2 from KZN, I think we can guess who they are. Then WC, Western Cape, and Western Province, if you add that together, that's 30. So basically 30 judges in the Western Cape and 40 in Gauteng, making up the bulk of the judges per province. Next would come Free State, KZN, and then a couple of the other provinces. But I think that's quite interesting, and we certainly like to get to grow the number of judges in each province. Probably the original and the biggest home brewing clubs were in Gauteng and Western Cape, and that's why they've got the biggest number of judges at the moment. Like I said, there are a number of ranks of judges in the BJCP, and here I've listed them all. You have to do a couple of exams, one of which is judging beer and one of which is writing, and I'll go through a little bit more detail there. And you have to earn points from judging at competitions or organizing competitions and so on. So the lowest rank where you're actually a fully qualified judge is the recognized, and for that you need to get at least 60% on the judging exam. Next up, certified, greater than 70% on the judging exam, and 5 experience points, or basically judging at five competitions. Then for the next higher ranks, you need to take the written exam as well. For national, you need to get an average on both the judging and written of at least 80% and 20 experience points. That's where I am at the moment. The next rank, nobody in South Africa has reached that yet. I aim to get there one day, but it is difficult, is the master, at least 90% average over judging in the written exam, and 40 experience points, and then a grandmaster with quite a number more experience points. I've got at the moment, I think, about 180 experience points, so I've got more than enough experience points, but to get an average of greater than 90% on the judging and written exam is difficult, and I haven't got there yet. I think most people who manage to do that spend some time marking other exams. That's one of the things you can do as well. If you're at least a national judge, you get to mark other exams, and then that helps you a lot to figure out what's a good answer and what's not. So I think that's really the only way to reach a master level. I have marked a few exams, but I haven't for a while, so I need to get back into that. Okay, the 3 different types of exams that one has to take to become registered with the BJCP is first an entry type exam, an online exam. It consists of a number of multiple choice questions. You either get a pass or fail mark. Some people, in fact, I would say most people, end up taking it 2 or 3 times. It goes over the beer styles and so on. And it is online. Theoretically, you would have time to quickly look something up, but you've got about 20 seconds to answer each question. So you don't really have time to go and look through books or something or download papers to look anything up. You kind of have to know that. So that's the first exam you have to take. It's really an entry exam. You can't do anything else until you've passed that. Then the judging exam is 6 beers in 90 minutes. And I'll say more about that in a moment, but that's supposed to replicate a typical homebrew competition. Typically that's the sort of number of beers you might have to judge in the time. And then to move up to the highest ranks, the national and the master, you have to take a written exam. As I've said, it's a short multiple choice section, then 5 essay questions in 90 minutes. The essays are 2 questions on style, where they ask you to compare and contrast 2 styles and say what's similar and what the differences are. 2 technical questions, typically about troubleshooting. There's a problem in the beer, what would you suggest the brewer does? And then 1 recipe formulation, where they say formulate a recipe for a particular style. And to do well, you have to do more than just write down ingredients. You have to explain why you chose each particular style of grain and each hop and so on, and was it for color, or was it for bitter, and where you're going to add it, to show that you understand that. Quite a challenging set of exams. but fortunately, only for people who want to move up to national or masters, the written necessary. Most people do the online exam, pass that, and then try and take the judging exam. And once you've done that, you can take the exam again and again to try to improve your score. But once you've passed the judging exam with at least 60%, you then set as a judge. A little bit more about that judging exam. 6 beers in 90 minutes, maybe slightly faster than your judge in a typical competition, but ballpark about what you should aim for in a competition. So 15 minutes per beer to complete everything. It's closed book, so you do have to know the styles well. You can't bring anything. You have to be able to judge it according to style. Whoever's in charge, the administrator will select 6 beers to represent a typical homebrew competition. So they're going to be a range of some very good beers and some very bad beers, and a good range of styles. They could be homebrew, commercial, blended, to add 2 different types of beer together, doctored with some sort of flavoring, or miscategorized where it's entered in the wrong category. You don't know which is what. The administrator will just bring in each beer. Every 15 minutes, the administrator brings in a beer. They announce what style it's entered as. That could be what it is, or it could be miscategorized to try and catch you. And you have to judge it accordingly to what the administrator says that beer style is entered as. And it happens at competitions and at the InterVarsity that people enter it in the wrong style, and then you have to be able to note that and give the appropriate feedback. How it's then marked is that there are 2 experienced judges, or proctors in American terms. They sit separately and judge the same beers with the same information, but they at least have an open book and they don't have a time limit, and they discuss it, and they then note exactly what they've observed. And then 2 markers, or graders in American terminology, will get your score sheets, the administrator's notes on the beers, and the proctor's score sheets. And what a grader then has to do is look at what the administrator said all about the beer, look at what the proctors thought about the beer, then they can have a good idea of what the beer should have been judged like, and then they go through your score sheets and mark how accurately you were. But I'm not going to go into much more detail about that. In preparation for an exam, one would go into a bit more detail. On exam preparation, the BJCP, as you've seen what it does, it doesn't run training. It provides guidelines, it provides registration and exams for the judges, and it provides a way of running competitions, but it doesn't run training courses. It has a bit of a suggested outline, and then it's rather up to you or whoever is organizing an exam to try and get together a training program based on that. In the past, the club in Gauteng, the Warthogs, the Southeasters, the Free State Fermenters, and the Beer House Bar have run some courses and exams. And like I noted there, if you don't get a real formal training program, it works very well. And the ideal is, if there's an exam coming up, form a study group of about at least 6 or so people who are planning on taking the exam, get 1 or 2 experienced judges to sit in, and you meet weekly for 2 to 3 months before the exam, judge beers, compare notes, get feedback from the experienced judges as to how you should have scored it. At this stage, we're looking at possibly an exam around November this year. I'm going to book one, and then I'll just let it be known. In Gauteng, sometimes the Southeasters organize an exam in Cape Town. There was one in December last year. I'm not sure if they have any more plans this year, but certainly in Gauteng, we're planning on an exam sometime in November. So I'll start advertising it, get enough people, and then 2 to 3 months ahead of that, start trying to organize some study groups. Right, moving on to a competition. Like I said, one of the main objectives of the BJCP is to have proper competition requirements. They give a lot of information and a lot of suggestions, but these are really the absolute minimum requirements. The judging must be blind. In other words, the judges do not know whose beer it is. They must not at all know or be able to figure out who entered that beer. It must be to a style. It says published styles. Obviously, the BJCP's own style is one, but there are a couple of other styles around, and as long as it's available and understood by the entrants and the judges, then that's fine. It can be used. Each table judging a beer must consist of 2 to 4 judges. 1 is too few, obviously, because that will just be one person's opinion. More than 4 gets a bit unwieldy. 2 to 3 is ideal. 3 is actually about ideal. Then each judge at the table judges the beer, and then afterwards you discuss it and come to a consensus. And there must be feedback given to the brewer. Those are the absolute minimum requirements. There aren't any other requirements about numbers or whether it must be in bottles or anything else like that some people occasionally think there are. Provided you do a competition to these 4 guidelines, then it's satisfactory for BJCP requirements. Okay, moving a little more specifically onto at the Intervarsity, we do comply with all of those. Clearly, all the beers are judged blind, and that's absolutely something we stick to. The judges don't know which university entered the beer that they're judging. At the Intervarsity, we typically have a couple of categories. Last year, 5 different categories, and with a number of entries, we have to have. Last year, 2 tables per category. Sometimes we've had 1, but last year each category had 2 tables judging it, and with at each table 2 to 3 different judges. So that's nicely within the requirements of the BJCP requirements. And each table then had to judge 6 to 8 beers. So in each category there were about between 12 and 20 beers, 12 and 16 beers entered. So with 2 tables per category, each table had to judge 6 to 8, and there were 2 to 3 judges per table. Then, because there's 2 tables per category, and we do want a top 3 of each category, we take the best from each of those 2 tables, and they have a mini best of show round per category where they identify the top 3 in each category. And then the top 1 from each category goes to an overall best of show round. That's typically, we identify 3 judges, 3 of the more experienced judges or something like that, and then they do a best of show round and pick the best out of the category winners, and then that's now announced as the overall best of show. Our numbers last year, there we have it, the 5 different categories, 65 entries there were last year, 33 people judged, 2 tables per category like I mentioned, and in order to make it blind, all the beer was served from bottles without any labels on it, just with a tag. And those of you who took part last year will have seen what that tag looked like. We'll take a look at it again in a moment. Each judge gets a sheet looking something like this. Here's from last year's 2022 competition. So the people who are judging at one of the lagers table got a list like this. This I see is 7 entries that they had to judge. They are just told the style and then obviously the BJCP category and subcategory. And then the beers just have numbers. Being a lager, these all started with L, and then it just has a random number so they can have absolutely no idea which university entered it. For some of the categories, a little bit more information is required. If it's just IPA or a lager to a specific style, then there isn't really any need to give any other information. If it's the African wild ales or some of the sour beers or some of the other categories like a summer beer, where there were some tweaks to the styles and some additional additions, then it helps to give a little bit more information so the judges know what they're judging. And here's an example from last year, just so that the judges will understand. Some of these are fairly brief notes. That was fine for this purpose, but I am going to talk when it comes to completing the entry form a little bit more about this, about that. But that's all the judges see. They get a little bit of information as provided by the university where required. This is a typical one of the tags, in this case for the IPA category. So it starts with an I, and this is entry number 6. And that's there, and then it's at the bottom of the tag as well. So in case it gets smudged or someone tries to read it upside down, it's very clear what entry that is. Here is the score sheet used by the judges. You may have seen it. It's probably the most commonly reproduced document from the BJCP website, a standard score sheet for beer. And I'll go through different parts of it, but that's what it looks like. Zooming in a little bit on the top end here, top left, the judge's name and everything and qualifications. Then on the right-hand side at the top, we get the category and subcategory and entry number. And then we start going through the various categories that are judged. You'll see here aroma is the first category, appearance. As we go down, below appearance, we get flavor. Then below that, mouthfeel and overall impression. On the left-hand side here, a couple of categories which are generally considered as false, although in some styles of beer they are acceptable. And if they are at moderate or higher levels, the judge should just indicate that. And then at the bottom left here, a guide for scoring, and then the bottom right, a couple of tick boxes for the judges to fill in. Is it a classic example of stylistic accuracy? Then the technical merit, how well it's made, and then intangibles, things you can't quite describe but contributes to your enjoyment of the beer. To summarize that scoring, it's a total score out of 50, 5 different categories. The aroma, that's 12, so that's a reasonably important category. All of these are judged according to the style that the beer is entered as. So if you've done a great beer but you entered it as the wrong style, you will be marked down here. So aromas out of 12, looking at the hops, the malt, are there any off flavors, any esters, DMS, diacetyl. Appearance, 3, that's quite a small one. So appearance is looking at, is the beer hazy or not? What's the color? What's the head? Interestingly, it's quite a low number. So if you get the color completely wrong, you're not really going to lose too many marks here. Flavor, the most important category. Malt flavor, hop bitterness, balance, finish, esters, and so on. Mouthfeel, 5 points, not a big category. One, also an important one. That's the body, the carbonation, this warmth from alcohol, astringency, creaminess, and so on. And then an overall impression out of 10. And here is most commonly where the judge can give a lot of good feedback about it was well made, but it was in the wrong category, or it was close to the right style, but missed out on 1 or 2 things, and so on, adding up to a total of 50. Right, I said I wanted to say something about using the entry form as much as possible to optimize the scores, and a few things to mention here. Ensure your beer is entered as the correct style. I mentioned earlier, BJCP is very clear that the beer has to be judged against the style that it was entered as in the exam, in a competition, everything. So make sure it's in the correct style. It does occasionally happen that you get a very well-made beer, but it's not in the right style. And if you're not sure when it comes time to put in an entry form, you can email me, or I can give you my opinion or suggest you contact an experienced judge in your area to try that. But most definitely the beer has to be judged to what you enter it as, so please ensure it is entered as the correct style. Some beers require a description, and I have found over the years at the Intervarsity that the more clear and accurate this description is, the better you are going to score here. If you enter a beer in an unusual category of African wild ale or something, and you don't really describe what you're aiming for, the judges find it very difficult to give you a good score, because they're not quite sure if this is what you wanted, or is it something that went wrong somewhere else and you just entered. So at very least in some of these, not, like I say, not really for the lager or IPA, those are pretty clear. Some the other categories, it helps a lot to describe at very least the ingredients, if you have some unusual ingredients, and then kind of what you're aiming for. The more accurate description you can get, the better. So tell us what sort of strength you're aiming for, what color, is it supposed to be similar to some classic style like a Belgian Orval or something. And the more accurately you describe there, the better. And then understand how the judges will evaluate the beer. I've just gone through the score sheet for that. See where you can score good marks and where you're not. I'll go through a few more tips as well towards the end here. But those are important things to think about. Here's an example of, I think, quite a good description where this university has written a nice description of what they were aiming for. Please, when you write a description of your beer, don't give away which university you're from, otherwise I will have to redact that from what I give the judges. But if you can just say, what were you thinking, what did you use, what were you aiming for, and so on, that helps a lot, because then it gives the judges a pretty good idea. Have you achieved what you're aiming for? Is it clear what you're aiming for? Is it a good idea? Did it work out well? If there's not much information like this, then the judges really don't have much to go on, and they're not quite sure exactly what the beer was supposed to be. Right, just a picture or two from judging from Intervarsity 2022. I thought I'd just throw that in. These are all from the website. You can see a couple of judges at various tables, and then the CUT people who bring the beer to them blindly, so they don't know which it's from. Okay, the last part that I thought I would speak about is one document that I occasionally go through. It does originate on the BJCP website as just something which is someone's suggested way of approaching the judging of a beer. It's not a requirement, but in preparation for an exam, I sometimes go through this with people who are going to take the exam, and some like it, some don't. But I think at least for the university people, it might give an idea of how a judge may approach a beer. Step one, smell the aroma and record the first thing that you smell. What do you smell? Is it off? Do you smell hops? Is it very malty? Whatever. First impression, record that. You might adjust it later, but just record that as that is the first thing that you smelled. As soon as the beer has been poured, you get a good aroma, and it's often very helpful to note that down first. Then move on to the appearance category. That's fairly straightforward. Mark out of 3. You can look at it. You record, note down what you see. Assess means score. Assess means compare to what you expected for that style, and then give it a score. And you can do that pretty easily in 3. In a short while, give it a mark out of 3. Look at it, record down what you see, assess it against what you expect, and give it a score. Okay, then you go back to the aroma again, and you now assess it. Compare what you're picking up to what you would expect for that style. I've just suggested the various things you have to consider: the malt, the hops, the esters, and other things like DMS, diacetyl, off flavors, and so on. Then step 4, take your first sip of the beer and taste it and record immediately. What's your first impression? Again, it might change, or you might want to tweak it, but just taste it. Note down the first thing that you taste. Then assess that. Assess again, meaning score it, compare it to what you would expect for that particular style. Is the malt what you'd expect? The hops, the balance, that refers to the balance between malt and hops. The finish, is it dry or sweet? Esters, and other things like off flavors, phenols, and so on. So then that's assess it against what you would expect. Then move on to the mouthfeel, and again, that's a relatively small category, score out of 5, and you can do it pretty much at one go. You record what do you taste in terms of mouthfeel, assess it against what you expect, and give it a score. And the aspects you look at are body, carbonation, warmth, creaminess, and astringency. Warmth here referring to alcoholic warmth. Okay, now you can go back to the big categories. The aroma, step 7, you give it a score. You've given it a first impression, you've assessed it, and now you can give it a score. All of these tie together, but the biggest categories you can kind of at the end score, give them the appropriate score, seeing if the aroma is really good and the taste lets it down or something. But by now you have a good overall impression of the beer. The largest category, score out of 20, move to taste, give it a score out of 20. Again, now by now you've got a pretty good overall impression of how it's done. Is it good, bad? Does it enter in the wrong category, and so on? And then move to the final category, step 9, giving an overall impression. And here you can give a lot of comments and feedback. This is the space on the sheet where the judge can say whether the beer is to style or not, and feedback as to how you can improve it. So that done all the categories, then you go to 10, add up the score, and adjust it if necessary. Some people get in their minds a final score that the beer should score, and then if they add this up and they find it's very different, then you have to maybe just reconsider, adjust some of your scores, or consider if your final score is correct. There's various ways of doing it. Some like to add up each one individually and just take the final score. Some like to get a final score in their mind and kind of work backwards and adjust the other scores until they get it. But that's just one approach, but it's one that I use, and I quite like this particular approach to judging a beer. For those of you here who are not immediately planning on judging but on brewing, I think the important things to note are that those are the various categories that the judges look at: aroma, appearance, flavor, mouthfeel, and an overall impression, the relative scores of each, and that a judge is going to consider each one, record what they see, assess it against what the guidelines say that beer should be, and then give it a score, and then make sure that the overall score does seem to be correct, and hopefully give you some feedback as to how to improve it. Great, I think that is the end of what I wanted to say for today. Time for some questions.
Thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate that. Yeah, like they say, if you want to play in the game, you need to know the rules. And it seems like that the BJCP guideline and everything that you've mentioned is providing that clear information. Sorry. Anton, I see you've got a question for Chris.
Yeah, just firstly, well done, Chris, once again. There was a question around whether there are other beer style formats, which I will also answer. But maybe for those students and any others that are listening, it's not absolutely prescriptive as to how some of the how one would achieve the outcome that you'll have on your taste sheet. So there are different ways of making a classic beer style. Clearly, the formulaic and recipe version that you get from looking at what a classic beer style is and how to brew it will give you a very good result. But there are obviously other ways, and students are very innovative. There are clearly other ways of achieving a roast malt flavor than just roast malt. There are other roasting processes. So use it as a guideline, but also use it as a way of, as a base for innovation. There's many, many ways of skinning a cat, as it were. And just the other side, there was a question about, are there other beer styles? Every big brewing company has its own way of tasting, and there's some kind of architecture to that. And mostly that is not shared with the public. BJCP was actually formulated in order to be able, that the public as well could be able to see how beer is judged, and to give a platform for all the small brewers. I'm aware of a different tasting format run by the European Beer Star out of Munich, and there are one or two others, but some other large competitions where you'd expect them to have their own unique tasting format will say, we're going to use the BJCP. So the BJCP, I think, literally is probably the biggest and most widely used. And while there are obviously small mistakes and small things we can improve on, it's a very, very strong standard. You can't go wrong with it. You might be able to make one or two small improvements, but it's a great base for tasting.
Definitely.
Yes.
And sorry, do you want to say answer or add something to that, Chris?
Just to say thanks, Anton. He will know better, but I'm aware of the European styles. I think there was also at one stage a UK style. I'm not sure if it's UK style guideline. Yeah. I'm not too sure if it's still around. But otherwise, Anton will know better. Thanks very much.
Okay. Something else that I also want to ask is, you did show a slide in terms of the number of judges that is available. How many of those judges are actually national judges in South Africa?
Sure. I believe 3 at the moment. There were 4.
Okay.
There were 4. One has not been active. And I didn't mention, but if you're not active for 2 years, you get taken off the list. You can get back on it, but if you're not active, and he hasn't been active for a few years, so he's been removed. There are a few people who have got very good judging scores who could consider taking the written exam and moving up there. But I think it's 3 at the moment.
And then, Chris, you also mentioned, and you said that for the students prior to them, entering and filling in their entry form, that they can contact you, because What happens if you have got an amazing beer, but you have now placed it in the wrong category? How do you prevent something like that happening?
Yeah, I try to go through every form that I get and see that it does look correct, and it sounds like it's in the right category based on what I can see of the beer and the description. I have in the past frequently emailed students back and asked for more description, either for my purposes, just to make sure that it's in the right category, or ask them to write down more on the description they give to the judges. So I do try to look at that, but obviously it's difficult without tasting the beer. So I think almost all of them have someone experienced nearby that they can contact and maybe ask to taste it.
So that is why that part where they have to fill in the description on the entry form, that's why that is so important.
Yeah. Like I said, for the unusual beers, the IPAs and the lagers, it's not too bad. But I normally look at the ingredients and so on and say it sounds like what it's aiming for. But yeah, for the other categories, the more description you can give, the better. Then I can go by that and try and, as far as I can, based on what I read, ensure that it's in the right category. Because I don't want anyone to be unnecessarily penalized for having a good beer but entering it in the wrong category.
Okay. And then in terms of, you said make contact with judges. Where and how do you find judges in your area? Where are their names listed somewhere?
No, they are not. And with various poppy acts and so on, I'm not too sure how easy that is. There is a document which is available to organizers, which lists all the judges. I have a copy of it, but the BJCP policy and the Poppy Act says I can't just put it on a website for everyone to see. But I think you're welcome to contact me if you are wondering about that. Like I shared earlier, some of the provinces don't have a lot of judges, but you can contact me, and I'm not quite sure how the contact system works in SAB these days, but Anton can probably add more. But each team has a SAB person assigned to them, and that person can probably assist quite a lot as well. I don't know if Anton wants to do anything on that.
Can I add to that?
Yes, please go ahead.
So obviously, Kyle, who was an ex-student who now works for SAB, a couple of other people, not a couple, it's about 10 people from this competition who work at SAB who we can contact. There's myself and the other 2 trade brewers. I'll get their permission first. But for all the students, also remember that there are definitely a good second place, and it might even be a first place. There are obviously micro brewers and garagists and some successful small craft brewers in every area close to a university. And if you just consult one of those gents or ladies, they will be more than willing to help. So I think if we just give you the name of a close by craft brewery, you'd be able to visit and make you'd be able to go and make inquiries without breaking the Poppy Act and just try and see if you can get a hold of somebody. They can either say yes or no, but knowing these people, it'll always be a big yes. And they will definitely, their whole careers are, and most of their pension money is stuck into their businesses. So they really do know how to brew, and they also know a lot about the tasting, and they can certainly be of great help.
Yeah, and most of them are known to at least 1 or 2 of the panelists here. So we could always put in a word and say, the team would like your help.
Okay, it seems like there's no more questions. So Chris, I think I will appreciate when you send your presentation through, maybe you can add a last slide and these contact names or your contact details, you can add to the slide, and then we can make it available, to the students. As I've mentioned, that the recording and the presentation will be available on the intervarsitybrew.co.za website. So, Chris, thank you so much for your time. And I'm sure of it, there's some of the students that will definitely start thinking of becoming judges, because it seems like, it's an interesting field to move in. And yes, like we said, the better you know the rules of the game, the better your brewing will be. So thank you very much to you. Thank you very much to the panelists as well. for being part and signing in. I just want to then remind those students that are on this webinar that there's 2 more webinars that will be following this week. I think tomorrow's is quite important. It's all about the labeling part, so it's the do's and don'ts of beer labeling, and Maraldi Kotze will present those. And then, oops-a-daisy, sorry, I think I just moved away my presentation. So let me just get that back. Oh, well, in the meantime, also just to show you that this is on the website where you can see the recording of Kyle, should you want to look at that. Today's recording will also then be posted there. So just want to say thank you so much. As soon as the broadcast has ended, we will have a survey again. Thank you so much for those students that did complete the survey yesterday. It's really providing us with valuable information. And without that, then thank you so much for your time, and looking forward to seeing you tomorrow again, same time, different link, but please make sure to attend. If you're aware of any of your colleagues that have not attended one of the webinars yet, please ask them to sign in. And yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's just adding value to all of you to make sure that you've got a good foot to enter this year's competition. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a great day.